Um, Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. If you're listening right now, I just want you to know this entire conversation has been curated and structured specifically for you.
Yeah, we really want you to feel like you're the third person in the room with us today.
Exactly. You are right here at the table. And our objective today is to take this really massive stack of texts. I mean, we've got ancient philosophical doctrines, suppressed historical texts, and some really cutting-edge scientific papers, and distill the absolute most vital insights from them.
And we are skipping the basic introductions today.
Right, because we know you already follow this space. You don't need the 101 level stuff.
No, you don't. Today, we're tackling something that fundamentally challenges the baseline architecture of how we perceive reality. We are exploring the grand unified framework of non-duality.
It's a staggering topic.
It really is, and it demands that we pull from a remarkably wide spectrum of human inquiry. I mean, we're looking at classical Eastern wisdom, the suppressed mystical traditions of the West.
Which are wild, by the way.
Oh, completely. And then the very pragmatic approaches of contemporary teachers. And where this gets truly revolutionary for me, the latest empirical data from quantum physics, cognitive science, and experimental biology.
Yes. The biology part is going to blow your mind later.
Our mission today isn't just to, review the philosophy of oneness. It's to rigorously examine the proposition that the boundary between subject and object, between yourself and the external world, is actually a cognitive and biological illusion.
Right.
We're tracing how the realizations of ancient contemplatives perfectly map onto the mathematical frameworks of modern physicists.
Which is just intellectually thrilling. But before we get into the historical architecture and the biological experiments with the flatworms and all that, let's just do a quick grounded thought experiment.
I love this one.
Okay, so I want you, the listener, to look at the device you're playing this on right now. Just look at the physical space, the air, the actual distance between your body and that object.
Our default operating system dictates that you are definitively here as the observer, and that device is definitively there as the independent object.
Exactly. But what if that localized boundary, the very concept of distance and separation, is strictly a functional interface?
Like a useful illusion.
Yes.
Yeah.
What if, beneath the rendering of human perception, the observer and the observed are the exact same continuous field of reality?
When you strip away the evolutionary heuristics that our brains evolved to, navigate the physical environment, the hard line between me and not me becomes incredibly porous.
It really does.
And this isn't just a metaphysical parlor trick anymore. It's a testable scientific hypothesis that is currently overturning decades of materialist assumptions. We are moving from non-duality as a purely subjective spiritual realization to non-duality as the fundamental ontology of the universe.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the ancient roots, because we all know the basic Sanskrit translation of Advaita. It means not two.
Right, not two. It's not one as a numerical digit, but an indivisible whole.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And since you, listening right now, are likely familiar with the broad strokes of Advaita Vedanta, let's look past the beginner definitions and really dive into the precise mechanics of its three pillars.
The three pillars. Right. Brahman Satyam Jagat Mithya and Jivu Brahmava Napara.
Yes. And classical Advaita Vedanta provides one of the most logically rigorous maps of reality in human history. So let's look at that first pillar, Brahman Satyam.
Only the absolute is real. And we have to clarify, Brahman isn't a deity in the sky.
Right. It's not a guy with a beard.
No, it is the ultimate, unchanging, infinite ground of being. It is the substrate. And then that leads to the second pillar, Jagat Mithya, which roughly translates to the world being an apparent transient illusion, or Maya.
But we really need to be precise here, because I feel like people get hung up on the word illusion.
They absolutely do. Mithya doesn't mean the world is a hallucination or that physical laws don't apply. If you step in front of a bus, the bus is going to hit you. It means the world possesses a dependent reality. It has no independent, standalone existence apart from the substrate. It's exactly like how a wave has no existence independent of the ocean.
I love that analogy. And then the third pillar, which is really the absolute psychological linchpin of the whole thing, Jiva Brahmava Napara.
The individual self is identical to Brahman.
Identical. Not a part of Brahman, not a reflection of it, but the totality of it. Which brings us to the Mahavagas, the great sayings, like Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, and Tattvamasi, thou art that.
It's the ultimate collapse of the subject-object divide.
It is. And the fundamental nature of this reality is described as Sat Chitananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss.
What's fascinating here is the ontological weight of those terms. Sat isn't existence as a property that something has, it is isness itself. Chit is pure, unconditioned awareness, and Ananda is bliss, but
But not in the way we usually think about it, right?
exactly. It's not dopamine-driven human happiness. It's not the feeling you get when you eat a great slice of pizza. It is the absence of lack. It is the profound equilibrium of a system that is entirely whole.
We're all familiar with the classic Vedanta movie screen analogy. You know, the idea that the screen remains completely untouched by the drama of the movie projected onto it.
Right. The fire on the screen doesn't burn the screen.
Exactly. But what's really fascinating about applying that analogy at this level is the realization that we spend our entire lives desperately trying to manipulate the pixels of the movie.
Oh, completely.
We try to rearrange the light on the screen to achieve Ananda, completely missing that our true nature is the screen itself, which is already perfectly whole.
It's a profound shift in perspective, and when we trace this realization across geographical boundaries, we see Buddhism arriving at the exact same coordinates through a completely different methodology.
Right, because Vedanta emphasizes the ultimate presence of the self, but Gautama Buddha utilized rigorous deconstruction.
He introduced anatta, the concept of no permanent self. By dissecting human experience into the Skandar's form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, he demonstrated that nowhere within that machinery is a static CEO calling the shots.
Right, it's a dynamic process, not a solid entity. You can't find the you in there. And this ties directly into Pratityasamutpada, dependent origination.
I think this is where the Buddhist framework becomes incredibly sharp.
I agree. Nothing possesses inherent independent existence. If you isolate any single object, it immediately bleeds into the rest of the universe. The classic Mahayana text, the Heart Sutra, gives us that famous line, form is emptiness, emptiness is form.
And Western audiences constantly misinterpret the word emptiness here.
All the time. They conflate shunyata with nihilism, or a literal vacuum, like it's just a dark void.
That is a critical mistranslation of the concept. Emptiness doesn't imply a void at all. It implies a lack of separate, independent self-nature. The form of a tree is empty of independent existence because it is entirely constituted by non-tree elements: sunlight, soil, water, atmospheric carbon. To say form is emptiness is to say that form is radical interconnectedness.
The thinker and the thought co-arise. The subject observing and the object being observed are a single, unified event happening in consciousness.
Exactly. And while Buddhism used rigorous logical deconstruction to get there, it's amazing to see Taoism approach the exact same oneness by rebelling against the constraints of language itself.
Yes, Laozi opens the Tao Te Ching with the ultimate disclaimer. The Tao, it can be told, is not the eternal Tao.
It's a brilliant acknowledgement of the linguistic trap. Human language is inherently dualistic.
It forces a divide.
Yes, its basic architecture requires a subject acting upon an object. I see the tree. The moment you deploy syntax, you have fractured the undivided reality into discrete parts.
Taoism points to the undifferentiated reality beneath that conceptual overlay, which brings us to their really nuanced understanding of yin and yang.
Which, again, gets totally flattened in Western pop culture.
Oh, completely. We treat yin and yang like a cosmic battle between good and evil. Light versus dark, Jedi versus Sith.
Right, but Taoism sees them as mutually arising dependencies. You physically cannot conceptualize the idea of up without simultaneously invoking the concept of down.
Right, they aren't enemies. They are the two necessary poles that allow a single phenomenon to manifest.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this mutual arising is what grounds the Taoist practice of Wu Wei, or non-action.
And Wu Wei isn't passive resignation, right? It's not just sitting on the couch doing nothing.
Not at all. It is frictionless participation in the flow of reality where the cognitive barrier between the doer and the deed completely collapses. When an expert martial artist is sparring, there is no internal monologue calculating the physics of a block.
The duality vanishes, and there is only the spontaneous action. Okay, so we see this profound, sophisticated articulation of non-duality in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism.
Yeah.
But a major blind spot for a lot of people exploring this space is the assumption that Western philosophy entirely missed the boat. We tend to view the West as strictly analytical, rigid, and hopelessly dualistic.
But there is a massive, often suppressed, non-dual current running right through Western intellectual history.
Let's talk about Neoplatonism. specifically Plotinus in 3rd century Greece.
Plotinus is absolutely essential here. He introduced the philosophical concept of the one, or the good, and his definition is remarkably uncompromising.
What did he say exactly?
He explicitly wrote, "The one and the good have an identical nature." For Plotinus, the one is an absolutely simple, undifferentiated unity that precedes all existence and all categories. It cannot be described by attributes because attributes imply division.
And instead of a creator god who builds the universe like a carpenter building a chair, which is a heavily dualistic model, Plotinus believed the visible universe emanates from the one.
Like heat radiating from a fire or light from the sun.
Right. The world has different layers of complexity: intellect, soul, matter, but it is all made of the exact same continuous substance as the one, which is basically just a Hellenistic framing of Brahman and Maya.
The structural parallels are identical. And this emanation theory deeply influenced the mystics of the Middle Ages, most notably the 13th century Dominican theologian Meister Eckhart.
Oh, Eckhart represents a fascinating flashpoint.
He really does, because his realization of non-duality put him on a direct collision course with the theological establishment of his time.
Let's really look at this, because his quotes aren't just poetic, they were philosophically explosive. He famously stated, "Between God and the soul, there is no between."
We read that today and think it sounds nice and spiritual, like a nice greeting card.
Exactly. But in the context of the 13th century Catholic Church, that is a profoundly dangerous idea.
It was pure heresy. It fundamentally threatened the entire institutional power structure. The Church operated on a strictly dualistic model. God is infinitely transcendent, humanity is inherently fallen, and the Church, along with its sacraments, priests, and tithes, is the indispensable bridge across that infinite gap.
And then Eckhart comes along and says, essentially, the deepest ground of your soul and the ultimate ground of God are the exact same ground.
There is no gap.
And if there is no gap, you don't need the middleman. You don't need the institution to mediate your salvation.
Precisely. To realize the divine is to realize one's own ultimate nature. It is pure non-duality wrapped in Christian vernacular.
It's why he was investigated by the Inquisition.
Yes, and his teachings were formally condemned by the Pope shortly after his death. The political reality of the time could not tolerate a framework that democratized access to the absolute.
That tension between radical oneness and institutional dualism really sets the stage for what happens in the 17th century with Baruch Spinoza.
Spinoza is a giant in this field.
He really is. To understand why he was a genius, we have to contextualize him against René Descartes. Descartes gave us the ultimate philosophical nightmare: substance dualism.
Res cogitans and res extensa.
Right. He divided the universe into mind or thought and physical matter. But Descartes could never adequately explain how these two totally different substances interact.
How does an immaterial thought cause a physical arm to raise?
Exactly. He ended up bizarrely suggesting they communicated through the pineal gland in the brain.
It was an elegant failure that haunted Western philosophy. Descartes created the mind-body problem. Spinoza arrives a generation later and completely dissolves the problem with a framework of radical monism.
In his masterpiece, The Ethics, Spinoza mathematically argues that there can only be one infinite substance in existence.
Because if there were two, they would limit each other, and neither would be infinite.
Right. He called this single substance God, or nature, Deus si natura. I love how unapologetic he was about it. He completely strips away the anthropomorphic idea of God as a guy making decisions.
For Spinoza, the totality of the cosmos, the laws of physics, the fabric of reality itself, that is the one substance.
And everything that exists, every quasar, every human, every thought, is just a temporary mode or ripple in that one substance.
This elegantly bypasses Descartes entirely. For Spinoza, mind and matter are not two different substances trying to talk to each other. They're simply two different attributes of the exact same underlying substance.
Right.
It's like observing a cylinder. Look at it from one angle, you see a circle. Look from another, you see a rectangle. They appear fundamentally different, but they are expressions of the same unified object.
Which is brilliant. And naturally, Spinoza was excommunicated by his religious community for it.
Of course he was.
It seems like realizing the non-dual nature of reality was a great way to get yourself canceled in historical Europe.
It definitely was.
But this unbroken thread, stretching from the Upanishads to Plotinus to Spinoza, is exactly what modern thinkers like Aldous Huxley and Ken Wilber identified as the perennial philosophy.
The perennial philosophy posits that beneath the cultural, linguistic, and historical dogmas of the world's various traditions, there lies a singular, verifiable truth about the nature of reality and human consciousness.
It suggests that non-duality isn't just a culturally conditioned belief.
Right. It's an experiential realization available to the human nervous system when the dualistic conceptual mind is brought to rest.
Which brings us perfectly to the contemporary voices, because this shift to the present is where this material stops being a historical autopsy and becomes highly actionable for you listening today.
We have modern teachers who are translating this dense ontology into direct phenomenological inquiry.
Let's look at Swami Sarvapriyananda. He uses that classic ocean and waves metaphor we touched on earlier, but he applies it to solve the apparent contradiction of multiplicity.
He notes that even if there is multiplicity, there can be one underlying reality.
It's such an important distinction because the analytical mind constantly objects. It says, if reality is non-dual, why do I see a billion different things?
Right. But the waves metaphor demonstrates that form and substance are not the same metric. You can have 10,000 distinct waves, each with its own velocity, height, and lifespan.
The multiplicity of form is undeniable.
Yet there is only one substance: water. Sarvapriyananda emphasizes that realizing the water doesn't require destroying the waves.
And moving from the analytical to the visceral, we have Nisargadatta Maharaj. His teaching is laser-focused on the baseline feeling of presence.
The I am.
Yes. Before any conceptual identity is layered on top, before you are a listener of this deep dive, an employee, a parent, or whatever political affiliate, there's the primordial, unadulterated sensation of simply existing.
Nisargadatta famously instructed, the I am has brought you in, the I am will take you out, the I am is the door, stay at it.
It's a radical reduction. Nisargadatta diagnosed the human condition as a chronic misidentification.
We take the infinite featureless I am and fuse it with the finite, decaying body-mind complex. We bind the absolute to the temporary.
His prescription is to rest entirely in the pure I am, without attaching any predicates to it. No, I am this or I am that. Just the pure knowingness.
He asserted that this simple abiding is enough to untangle the deepest psychological suffering.
Building on that immediacy, Mooji discusses what he calls the pathless path. And I find this incredibly liberating.
Because the spiritual marketplace is built on the idea of a journey.
Exactly. You meditate for 20 years, you do the retreats, you accumulate merit, and maybe one day you achieve the goal. But Mooji completely short-circuits that.
He says, going in search of self is illusion. You are already the one self, only to find you are already here.
This raises an important question regarding the paradox of seeking.
The very mechanics of seeking require a subject who lacks, moving through time toward an object that is desired. Seeking reinforces duality.
Luji, echoing the Zen tradition, points out that you cannot travel to a destination you never left.
The realization isn't an acquisition of something new. It is the dropping of the false assumption of separation in the here-now conscious presence.
Rupert Spira takes this a step further by phenomenologically deconstructing our moment-to-moment experience.
Spira highlights that our most intimate reality is just the experience of awareness itself. And he makes this crucial point. Awareness is never disturbed by experience.
The implications of that are profound.
They really are. We habitually conflate the contents of awareness with awareness itself. When we experience deep grief, we say, I am sad. We identify as the grief.
But Spira points out that the awareness which illuminates the grief is not itself grieving.
Just as the space in a room isn't burned when a fire is lit inside it, the awareness is inherently pristine, untouched by the turbulence of sensory or emotional data.
He argues that the lasting peace we are constantly trying to acquire from external objects, from money, relationships, or status, is actually the baseline nature of our own awareness. We are the happiness we seek.
It's a beautiful way to frame it.
It is. But, and I have to interject here with a bit of a confession, it is so incredibly easy to turn everything we are discussing right now into just another intellectual trap.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is exactly what Acharya Prashant warns about. I was sitting here reading his work for this deep dive, aggressively taking notes, trying to conceptually master the idea of not conceptualizing, and getting frustrated that I wasn't enlightened yet.
It is the ultimate irony of studying non-duality. The ego attempts to co-opt the teachings of its own demise to make itself a better, more spiritual ego.
Acharya Prashant cuts right through this. He points out that the mind's default operating system is division. He states there's only one duality, called duality.
Any attempt by the mind to grasp reality inevitably splits it.
He says all knowledge is dualistic. Knowledge means a subject and an object that is duality.
That is a tough pill to swallow for intellectually driven people.
It really is. He's saying that accumulating massive amounts of data on non-duality is structurally no different than accumulating wealth or material possessions. It's still the separate self trying to acquire something to secure its existence.
If we synthesize the core mechanics of these modern teachers, we find a unified consensus. First, the ego is recognized not as a noun, a physical thing in the brain, but as a verb, an ongoing activity of resistance and grasping.
Second, realization is immediate. It is a shift in perspective, not the culmination of a temporal process.
And third, the complete dissolution of the sacred mundane divide. The absolute reality is just as present in the mundane act of drinking a glass of water as it is in the deepest meditative trance.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Everything we've discussed so far, from the Upanishads to Spinoza to Mooji, belongs to the realms of philosophy and mysticism.
But we live in an empirical age.
We do. And the hard sciences are currently undergoing a paradigm shift that is independently arriving at these exact same conclusions. It's not just poetry anymore, it's physics and biology.
The historical trajectory of science is a progressive march toward unification. James Clerk Maxwell proved that electricity and magnetism are a single electromagnetic field.
Einstein demonstrated that space and time are an inseparable continuum, space-time.
Quantum mechanics destroyed the classical boundary between the observer and the observed, showing that particles exist in states of probability until entangled with an observation. The trend is clear. The deeper we look, the more the boundaries dissolve.
Exactly. And now we have brilliant minds taking this to its ultimate ontological conclusion. Let's look at Bernardo Kastrup and analytic idealism.
Kastrup is doing incredibly heavy lifting to dismantle physicalism.
Physicalism being the mainstream scientific assumption that the universe is made of dead, unconscious matter, and that consciousness is just a magical byproduct of complex brain chemistry. The famous hard problem of consciousness.
And physicalism has entirely failed to explain the hard problem. There is no mathematical or logical equation that explains how the objective kinematics of physical matter atoms bouncing around suddenly ignite into the subjective qualitative experience of tasting a strawberry or feeling love.
Kastrup flips the foundational axiom. He argues that consciousness is not an emergent property of matter. Consciousness is the fundamental ontological primitive.
As he states, consciousness isn't created, but is the framework wherein all creation happens.
Kastrup proposes that the universe is one singular, universal consciousness. But wait, if there is only one universal mind, how do we explain the very obvious fact that I cannot read your thoughts and you cannot feel my physical pain? We clearly have separate, localized experiences.
Kastrup's answer to this is brilliant. He uses the psychiatric model of dissociative identity disorder, or DID.
Right.
It's a highly robust psychological model. In patients with DDI, a single human mind fractures into multiple distinct personalities, or alters. These alters can have entirely different memories, personalities, and physical reactions.
Kastrup points to empirical neuroimaging studies of DID patients where a blind alter takes over the body. The patient's eyes are open and functional, but the brain's visual cortex actually shuts down.
The alter literally cannot see. The dissociation is functionally real, and Kastrup scales this to the cosmic level.
So, biological organisms, you, me, a dog, a bird, are essentially dissociated alters within the one universal mind. The physical universe we observe is what the thoughts of the universal mind look like across our dissociative boundary.
That is literally Advaita Vedanta described in the language of modern psychiatry and physics.
It is. But if Kastrup provides the philosophical framework, developmental biologist Michael Levin provides the jaw-dropping empirical data.
Michael Levin's experimental work at Tufts University is fundamentally destabilizing the materialist view of biology. The prevailing assumption is that memory, learning, and biological intelligence are strictly centralized in the neural network of the brain.
Levin challenged this by working with Pinarian flatworms. They possess a centralized brain and nervous system, but also remarkable regenerative capabilities.
You have to walk through the exact methodology of this because it is staggering.
Okay, yes. Levin and his team took these flatworms and trained them to navigate a specific textured maze to find food. The worms learned the layout, they encoded a memory.
Then they decapitated the worms.
They entirely removed their brains. Over the next couple of weeks, the headless planarians regrew entirely new heads with completely fresh neural networks.
And when they put these regenerated worms back into the maze,
well, let's not leave them in suspense. They remembered the route.
which presents an absolute crisis for materialist neuroscience. If the brain containing the learned neural pathways was completely destroyed, where did the memory reside?
Levin's research points to the existence of a morphogenetic bioelectric field. The memory and the architectural blueprint for the body are not solely hard-coded in the DNA or the meat of the brain. They are distributed throughout an informational bioelectric field that the organism's cells interface with.
The intelligence is in the field, not the meat. The body and the mind are a continuum. It strongly suggests that consciousness or information dictates physical form, not the other way around.
And speaking of interfaces, let's talk about cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman. Hoffman has developed the interface theory of perception. He tackled this from an evolutionary game theory perspective.
He asked, does natural selection favor organisms that perceive objective reality as it truly is, or does it favor organisms that perceive useful illusions?
Hoffman ran rigorous evolutionary game theory simulations. The results were unequivocal. The probability that human perception maps onto objective reality is precisely zero.
Evolution mercilessly tunes out the truth in favor of fitness payoffs. To explain this, Hoffman uses a highly effective analogy, the computer-desktop interface.
Right. When you were writing an email, you see a rectangular icon on your screen. You interact with it, but you know that the reality of the computer has no rectangles.
It is an unfathomably complex network of voltages, silicon gates, and binary code. The icon is a functional illusion. If you had to interact with the raw reality of the voltages, you couldn't write the email.
Hoffman argues that space, time, and physical objects are not fundamental reality. They are merely the evolutionary desktop icons of our perception.
They are data structures created by our specific species-specific interface. Therefore, physics isn't the study of ultimate reality. It is merely the study of the rules of our interface.
Hoffman pushes this to the concept of conscious realism, proposing that the fundamental reality consists of interacting conscious agents. Space and matter are just the data formats consciousness uses to represent its interactions.
It's a complete inversion of how we normally think.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on this, because there's a glaring paradox here. If Hoffman's premise is that human evolution guarantees we cannot see reality, and that all our perceptions and models are just useful illusions, then how can we trust Hoffman's own mathematical models? Isn't evolutionary game theory itself just another illusion on the interface?
It is the ultimate epistemic challenge, and Hoffman addresses it directly. He distinguishes between our perceptual interface, which hides reality, and our mathematical or logical capacity.
Okay, how does that work?
His argument is that while evolution restricts our sensory perception to fitness-enhancing illusions, it still allows for rigorous logical and mathematical deduction. He uses the math derived within the interface to prove the limits of the interface.
It's akin to using the software of a computer to deduce that the computer must have hardware, even if you can't see the hardware.
Exactly.
Okay, that tracks. It's using the rules of the matrix to understand you're in a matrix. And we have heavyweights from the tech world corroborating this perspective. Federico Faggin, the physicist and engineer who literally helped invent the first commercial microprocessor, the very foundation of our digital age, is now a major proponent of consciousness as fundamental.
He states unequivocally, there need no longer be a duality between mind and matter. He says, matter is the ink with which consciousness writes its own self-knowing.
Coming from a pioneer of silicon technology, that is a profound pivot. And alongside Faggin, we have Christoph Koch, a giant in the field of neuroscience.
For decades, Koch searched for the exact neural correlates of consciousness. Ultimately, he collaborated on Integrated Information Theory, or IIT.
IIT doesn't treat consciousness as an illusion or an emergent accident. It treats it as an intrinsic, fundamental property of the universe, calculable by a metric called phi.
Let's explain phi conceptually. It's not just a philosophical guess. It's a mathematical framework. IIT basically says that any system that integrates information has some degree of consciousness.
A human brain integrates a massive amount of complex information, so it has very high phi. But even a simple photodiode, or arguably a single electron reacting to its environment, integrates some rudimentary information, so it possesses a non-zero phi.
Yes, IIT leans heavily toward panpsychism. It suggests that consciousness goes all the way down. The axioms of IIT intrinsic existence, composition, information, integration, and exclusion attempt to mathematically bridge the phenomenological experience with physical systems.
When we synthesize Kastrup, Levin, Hoffman, Faggin, and Koch, we arrive at a unified scientific paradigm.
The universe is a single, unfolding conscious field. Matter, space, and time are the localized renderings.
The hard problem of consciousness dissolves entirely because you no longer have to explain how dead matter miraculously wakes up. Matter is just what consciousness looks like from a dissociated perspective.
It's a complete paradigm shift.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered medieval heresies, quantum physics, and decapitated worms. But a theoretical framework is useless if it doesn't actually impact the human experience. Let's talk about the practical implications, starting with the psychological reality of existential dread.
The heaviest anchor on the human psyche is the fear of death, the annihilation of the self.
But if you deeply integrate this non-dual framework, that reality is consciousness, and you are not a body generating consciousness, but consciousness localizing in a body, the fear of death fundamentally reorganizes itself.
The paradigm shifts entirely. If physicalism is true, death is the absolute termination of your existence. But under a non-dual framework, death is merely the dissolution of the dissociative boundary.
The avatar, the specific collection of memories and traits that form your human ego, will cease. But the underlying substrate, the pure awareness that is your ultimate identity, is never lost, because it is the only thing that actually exists.
The wave crashes back into the ocean, but not a single drop of water is destroyed.
Viewing your personal identity as a fluid, transient phenomenon dramatically lowers the existential pressure. Your anxieties, your career failures, your social embarrassments, they are just passing weather systems in the vast sky of your awareness. They don't touch the sky.
Beyond the profound psychological relief, there are massive implications for the future of medicine and technology. Think back to Michael Levin's bioelectric fields.
If biological form is guided by an underlying informational layer, we are looking at revolutionary, non-mechanical approaches to healing.
Instead of blunt force pharmaceuticals or highly invasive surgeries, the future might involve communicating with the bioelectric field to trigger regeneration, healing severe trauma, reversing neurodegeneration, or regrowing tissue by rewriting the organism's morphogenetic code.
It's basically editing the software of the body instead of hacking at the hardware. And this completely reframes the current panic around artificial intelligence.
Right now, Silicon Valley assumes that if we just make large language models big enough, fast enough, and complex enough, they will magically spark into conscious sentience.
But if consciousness is fundamental, you can't build it out of silicon. Future AI research might shift toward creating physical systems that act as highly complex receivers, tapping into the fundamental field of awareness, rather than trying to engineer a synthetic soul from scratch.
It forces a complete reassessment of what intelligence and awareness actually are. But perhaps the most urgent application of non-duality lies in our ethical and ecological frameworks.
We are currently facing unprecedented ecological crises, driven entirely by a dualistic worldview. We view the Earth as an other, a dead resource separate from ourselves, meant to be extracted and consumed.
But if we apply the non-dual perspective logically, without being preachy about it, the environment isn't your surroundings, it is your extended body.
The separation between the oxygen in your lungs and the trees outside is arbitrary. It's a continuous biological loop. When you deeply realize that there is no other, polluting the ecosystem isn't just bad environmental policy. It is literal, functional autophagia. It is self-cannibalism.
It radically redefines ethics. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, ceases to be a moral commandment handed down by a religious authority. It becomes a purely descriptive statement of reality.
To harm another is to harm yourself, because at the level of the substrate, there is only one experiencer interacting with itself across different dissociative boundaries. Benevolence becomes the only logical response to recognizing your own reflection in the other.
Which brings us down to the granularity of your everyday life. How do you practice this when you're stuck in traffic or dealing with an infuriating email from your boss?
It's not about floating around in a mystical trance. It's about cultivating the capacity to observe the mechanics of your own mind. When the dualistic thought arises, I am right, they are wrong, I am separate, they are a threat, you recognize it as the interface doing what the interface evolved to do.
You don't have to identify with the icon on the desktop. You can step back, rest in the pure I am, and access the stillness beneath the cognitive noise.
To synthesize the immense ground we've covered today, I think it's clear the human pursuit of truth has taken incredibly diverse paths.
You can read the ancient Upanishads, you can analyze the geometric proofs of Spinoza, you can study the complex math of integrated information theory, or observe the cellular regeneration of flatworms.
The methodologies are radically different, but the coordinates they arrive at are exactly the same. The universe is a singular, undivided, conscious reality. The multiplicity we experience is the magnificent, localized rendering of that one absolute truth.
I think that sums it up perfectly.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. We talked about Federico Fagin's beautiful description that the physical world is just the ink that consciousness uses to write its own self-knowing.
Such a great line.
It is. If that is literally true, if matter is just the ink, what does that make your very next thought? When you turn off this deep dive and look into the eyes of a stranger today, or look at the trees moving in the wind, consider this. You are not an isolated person looking out at the universe. You are the universe, momentarily looking back at itself. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take care.